some really hot news happening and needs to be covered. Mark Anthony Conditt is the apparent terrorist. They're not calling him a terrorist because he's a white guy, but anybody who sends bombs to people, particularly to black people, who's a white guy, which is what he was doing, is a terrorist. And Charlotte Clymer posts just some really brilliant stuff. Charlotte posts, Mark Anthony Conditt was a white male terrorist, this is on Twitter, and a likely white supremacist. He perpetrated terrorist attacks against a community resulting in death and destruction. This is not quiet, reserved, a nice boy, or whatever the hell else whitewashing nonsense. I grew up in the same area as Mark Conditt. I was raised in poverty in an abusive household. I did not become a terrorist who takes a significant interest in white supremacy. Go to hell with this nice boy BS narrative. Nice boys don't ship bombs. And then she shows a picture of Draylen Mason at his cello, a young African-American. This is Draylen Mason. He was 17 years old. He was a talented cellist on track for the University of Texas when he was killed by a package from Mark Anthony Conditt. This was a nice kid. Ask yourself why you haven't heard about him over the past week. And Conditt, big supporter of the death penalty, calls himself a conservative. When are we going to start calling these people terrorists? I mean, it's Stockholm University, Christian Christensen. He says, U.S. media and politicians have been very, very quick to apply the terrorism label when suspects are not white because such an application carries no social or professional blowback when they're wrong. Brilliant. And now that the suspect has been identified as a white male, commentators predict the lawmakers, the major media, and law enforcement will likely follow the White House line that he's not a terrorist. All right, can you imagine if he had been Muslim or if he had been black? Amazing. It's just amazing. He's 23 years old. He's from Pflugerville, Texas. 5 bombs, killed 2 people, injured 4 others. Meanwhile, when Cambridge Analytica was coming up with memes for the Trump campaign, Donald Trump, has publicly said he was advised to use the phrases drain the swamp and build the wall, and he both thought that they were dumb. Unsophisticated, dumb, simplistic. But when he tried them, the crowds went nuts. And so he kept trying them over and over and building them over and over, and that became his signature. These came out of Cambridge Analytica. As Melissa B. posts over Democratic Underground, they literally tested Nazism in their focus groups and decided it was a winning message. The article is in the Washington Post. Bannon oversaw Cambridge Analytica's collection of Facebook data, according to a former employee, by Craig Timberg, Carla Adam, and Michael Krenish. Bannon received more than $125,000 in consulting fees from Cambridge Analytica and owned membership units in the company worth between $1 and $5 million. Wiley said that both Bannon and Rebecca Mercer, whose father Robert Mercer financed the company, participated in conference calls in 2014 in which plans to collect Facebook data were discussed. In focus groups arranged to test messages for the 2014 midterms. Keep in mind, this is before Trump came along. These voters responded to calls for, quote, building a new wall to block the entry of illegal immigrants, end quote, to reforms intended to, quote, drain the swamp, end quote, of Washington's entrenched political community, and to thinly veiled forms of racism toward African Americans called, quote, race realism. And finally, they tested Russian President Vladimir Putin. This was interesting. He says the only foreign thing we tested was Putin. It turns out there's a lot of Americans who really like this idea of a really strong authoritarian leader, and people were quite defensive in focus groups of Putin's invasion of Crimea. That's interesting. I think it's probably more complex than that, but in any case, the drain the swamp, build the wall, and race realism. These essentially Nazi memes were what Cambridge Analytica was testing and that the Trump campaign ran with. Now, juxtapose that with this news out of Illinois. Arthur Jones is the former head of the American Nazi Party. He still calls himself a Nazi. He's quite proud of his Nazism. He just won the Republican nomination for Congress in Illinois' 3rd Congressional District. A real Nazi. Tell me the Democrat or the Republican Party does not have a Nazi problem. Meanwhile, Cambridge Analytica has links to Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater. Alexander Nix and Eric Prince on Emmer Data, another company that is apparently picking it up from Cambridge Analytica.